And there's an interesting point in that too. I often say to my students, there's a reason. There's a reason for absolutely every single thing about you, folks. I'm talking to everybody listening. All your quirks, all your issues, your addictions, your habits, what you call bad habits, all these different things, including the wonderful things, the beautiful things. There's a reason for them all. And when you really understand from that point of view, and, a big part of my work has been about helping people understand themselves and understand this about themselves. Well, understanding is innate with that is love. It's coming from a place of love. It's not just intellectual understanding. It's understanding like full body and full emotional understanding. Compassion is integral to that when you really truly understand. And there's no more fighting with yourself about something. And interestingly enough, in that state, a lot of those quirks and issues and things tend to melt. They tend to dissolve in that love and understanding because love, source love, infinite unconditional love is the true healer. And you cannot evolve, awaken, heal, ascend when you're at odds with any part of yourself. Do you want to speak to any of that, Chokai?
Indeed. Well, yeah, and well said, because really, when people think of understanding, if they are thinking of it as like an intellectual exercise, it's really understanding is about being present with, your heart being fully present with something, right? So that you're aware of the dynamics involved, you see how it all connects, you see how it all works, okay? And from an objective point of view, it's not a judgmental thing at all. It's an objective thing. And so you're basically witnessing the beauty of the dynamic. And the things like you mentioned addictions earlier, and or people using like comfort foods and whatnot. The ego, in lieu of actual understanding, spiritual understanding, it will find ways to compensate for whatever the conflict is. That's why there's a reason for everything, and there's a need for it. There's a purpose for it, right? So if you have that addiction, or if you have that, you know, uh, what you might want to call obsessive uh, need for mashed potatoes every night, or the Oreo cookies, or whatever the thing is that people do, right? Um, it's like, all right, the ego is attempting to compensate for some form of inner pain, inner discomfort. Okay. And resolving that doesn't mean you don't get to eat the mashed potatoes anymore. It just means you're not compelled to. Okay. Because either you're making the choice, or your conditioning, ego conditioning, is making the choice for you. The challenge with that is that your ego conditioning is not very enlightened. Okay. It's all it has to work with is what it's been taught in a given lifetime, which is exceedingly limited. Okay. Exceedingly limited. And so, learning how to tap into that wisdom of your soul takes you to a whole new level and frees you from the grip of that unconscious conditioning. And, learn to look at things as a message, not a problem. And that will make a very big difference in how you not only uh, interact with yourself, but how you interact with all life everywhere. Okay? Because it's just a message. And exercising curiosity about that message. It's like, what is this? Just as my mentor did with me, what's a tree say to you, Chokai? What does a stone say to you, Chokai? Well, it's like, all right, what does this situation, or what does this ache, or this pain, or this compulsion, or whatever, what does this say to me? And learn how to listen to it. Do you know how people love to be listened to? Are you very likely love to be listened to? Well, practice that with yourself. It's not about trying to get someone else to listen to you. You listen to you. Okay. And that listening is really just about resting loving attention on whatever part of you wants to be heard. And so if you're hurting in some way, if you're in conflict about something, if you have some form of compulsion or addiction or what have you, okay, that's some part of you that wants to be heard. So listening to it is basically resting, loving attention, not trying to fix it, not trying to change it, just being present with it, listening. And it's amazing the kinds of transformations that can occur when you just bring loving attention to the thing that you have called a problem, which is really just a message trying to be heard. And since it is a message trying to be heard, listening to it is the fastest way to hear it and thus open the doors for transformation. And so I could go on, but that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, and just for our listeners, I want to give a real, or maybe more than one, real tangible example, especially when we're talking about food, because that is a big deal for a lot of people. So one person that I work with various colleagues, and we do dual work together, facilitating groups. We've done a lot for individuals in the past, and I work with wonderful, beautiful, intuitive people, psychics, channels, whatnot. Of course, we work together too, Chokai. But there's one person in particular that comes to mind as you were talking who was overweight. She struggled with weight. She was in her 20s, I think, her whole life, very overweight. And so when we were working with her, one of the things that came up was through various processes, realization, as well as intuitive puzzle pieces and insight that we provide. Because remember, folks, just because you've blocked something out of your awareness from your history, that doesn't mean others can't perceive it, particularly very highly in tune people, particularly who are compassionate as well, can help you with that. So what it came down to, or where it really started, was that she was feeling emotionally upset because of a trauma, which was, most people would think of as a small trauma, but to her child self, it was significant. And I think she was at a gathering with relatives, and someone said, "Here, have a piece of pie. This will make you feel better." And so she ate the piece of the pie, and suddenly she felt better. Well, there are biochemical reasons for that. There's attention. That person gave her compassionate attention in that moment. Various factors that all got fused into that moment to where the psyche goes, ah, pie equals feel good. And when we shared this with this person, she was like, "What kind of pie was it?" And the intuitive I was working with at the time said, "I'm seeing pumpkin pie." And she's like, "That's my favorite pie." And it was this revelation that here's where this foundational belief started and then kept building from there. So then the ego, the psyche, I kind of use them interchangeably at times, will then go, okay, every time I feel down, I should eat pie. And then sometimes maybe that will shift it, sometimes it won't, because it depends on the emotions of the moment. Your psyche's trying to help you feel better as a survival mechanism, because it's a psychological issue. It's not a biological issue that you're wired for. Your brain is wired for survival to avoid pain. When it registers emotional pain, it will kick in the survival mechanism as if it's physical pain to try to protect you. So then you build this repetitive pattern. And so maybe pie didn't work that one time. Okay, maybe I should try a different kind of pie, maybe pumpkin pie. And then you might do that, and you feel better. And then, so as you're progressing through the years, maybe at some point, then neither of those pies work. Well, then it might become food in general. And so it builds and builds and builds, and food was definitely an integral part of her overweightness. So that's just one tiny example of how these things start very early on, usually before age 3, but definitely before age 8. We have a saying in psychology, anything after 8 years old is just a rerun. You're just replaying patterns. But up until that point, you're still developing your identity. So everything literally gets enmeshed in your identity. And then the whatever the ego interprets, like, okay, this gets me by with that situation, this gets me by with that situation, these become patterns and habits. And if you have specific food, for instance, that your go-to food when you need comfort or when you're triggered or you're overwhelmed, there's a reason. There's an association somewhere in your history that got tagged with that. And that's easily breakable. That's easily clearable. But once you understand that and you stop judging and fighting yourself about your obsession with mashed potatoes, for instance, or whatever it may be, just calmly addressing that, oh, this comes from something. And whether or not you come to the full conscious awareness of the original event, you can connect with the feelings. But you got to be with the feelings.